And with that, we'll hand it over to David.
Hey, thanks, Joel. Can everyone see my screen? Or somebody give me a yes.
Yep, you're good, David.
Okay, thanks. So for anyone who wasn't on at the very beginning, or there's a number of us speaking today, forgot, I'm David Chapman. I am the Managing Director and Chief Strategist of Organizational Change Management at Perficient. And we've talked about adoption. We've talked about change management a lot already. It is critical for arguably anything that we do, whether it comes to a new process, a new technology, when you're talking about asking people to behave differently. And then as Joel mentioned a few minutes ago, there may not be a more important application to apply change management tactics to than teams. We'll talk around that a decent amount today. And a big reason for that, frankly, is there are alternatives, there are options, there are point solutions that do a lot of the things that Teams does. Now, we would argue Teams is the best solution because of the way it integrates with other applications and the ease of use. And I saw someone make a comment in the chat window earlier about the call quality. I think Teams probably has some of the best quality overall. And if you're used to using Skype, you'll notice that Teams has a much better performance overall. I don't know. I just said better performance, better ratings, I guess, on that front than Skype. So Teams is the complete package. But people won't use Teams just because you implement it. And so we'll talk about that today and the different tactics we'll use as we go through this next 45 minutes or so. In listening to the conversation earlier today, especially the introductions, one of the things that struck me that is not unusual, though, is the number of different places that you are. Some of you have fully implemented Teams and are looking for how to make it more effective and use it overall better to get the most out of it. Some of you are in the process of implementing. Some of you are thinking about it. And so I can't hit all of that from a change management perspective, but I'm going to hit three different situations here that I think will allow you to apply different aspects of change management to where you are. Now, the other thing I would say is let's talk more specifically after this, if you're interested, on where you are in your journey as it relates to adoption. And then we potentially can help provide some more specific and more tactical opportunities for you, or things that you can do that are more specifically where you are. One thing I talk about change management all the time is that it's not one size fits all. And my technical partners, I drive them crazy a lot because it's not one size fits all. There's no out of the box change management solution because we're dealing with people and we have to meet people where they are. And frankly, the notion of change is a very individual thing. People don't change just because you tell them to or because everybody else did it. They're not systems. They're smart. Anybody who works at your companies is a smart individual. There's a reason they're there. We have to convince them one person at a time on why to change. So the point being there is change is a very customized offering, yet critically important to drive the value, and we'll talk about that. So what I'm going to do, as I've kind of broken this into three sections. First, change management basics. Let's make sure we're all grounded on what we're talking about. Secondly, then let's take that and apply it to Microsoft Teams. And then finally, okay, what now? Because all the rules are out the window, the playbooks are out the window as it relates to COVID-19 for many of you. What can you do in the midst of the situation? So getting us going, the basics. So I stole shamelessly from Field of Dreams. Many of you have seen that movie. I'd argue probably most, if not all of you, have seen that movie. And by the way, if you didn't know, they're going to, well, I don't know now, actually, now that I was thinking about this. In theory, they were playing a baseball game in a cornfield this year in Iowa. The Yankees and maybe the White Sox, I think. I'm not sure if that's going to happen or not. But the whole point is, in the movie, you'll remember the Silent Whisperer, which if we were in the room, I'd ask you the trivia question who that was that did the Silent Whisper. If you build it, he will come. The reality is nobody knows. That's never been disclosed who it is. But we treat our technology projects a lot of the same way. Just because we build it, we expect them to come. And it doesn't work. We know 12, 15 years ago, the first time I saw this statistic, that 2/3 of all change initiatives fail. And they don't fail because of the technology aspects. We usually get that piece right. They fail because of the user adoption pieces, the lack of stakeholder engagement and involvement. And I mentioned we did this first study 12, 15 years ago, and you might be saying, David, that's an old number, and you're right. But the reality is it hasn't changed a lot. In fact, it's gotten a point or two worse. It's not because we're doing less change management. Actually, we're doing more change management than ever, but our projects are more complex. There are more options for users. Teams is a perfect example of that. We've talked about Zoom and WebEx and other point solutions that are out there, which have their own merits. And there are other options for people. Now, our job is to help folks realize why Teams is the answer, why it is the answer for a corporation from a global perspective, a holistic perspective, and not a whole bunch of point solutions. But when there are options, people may choose them. We've got to get them there. That's a change management thing. So at the end of the day, at Perficient, and frankly across change management circles around the world within the discipline, our job is to get people ready, willing, and able to work in new ways. Change management is the structured approach for making that happen. Now, we know project success, to go to the last slide, to tie back to that last slide, is dependent on two things. We have to get the technology right. To the comment I made before, we usually do. But we have to get the users actively engaged. If we don't do that, the technology becomes just another investment that we've made that didn't get the ROI we were looking for. In fact, you'll see this later, but we would say, and there's finally data to support this, that 70 to 80% of our ROI is driven by people working in ways that we want them to. It's about changing people's behavior. So the question I'd ask from a change management perspective is, why don't we invest more in it? We invest a lot of money in getting the technology right, but we don't invest in the change piece. And I would ask those of you rhetorically, when you've done projects within your companies, whether it's implementing Teams or whether it's implementing something else, did you invest in the change part? Because the return on investment is there 3 to 4 times what it is on the technology side, and it can make all the difference in the world. It's an important discipline. So why? Well, we know that projects are 6 times more likely to be successful if we get the change management piece right. Doesn't mean you can't be successful. And again, many of you out there probably implemented projects without change management, and you can say, yeah, that was a success. But the odds are against it. And so investing in that change management piece is critically important. We also know there's disruption when we go live. I've been doing this 22, 23, 24, maybe 25 years now. And I've been around a lot of projects. And I'm not sure, actually, I'm pretty sure I've never been around a project, but when we went live, it was smoother in working on Monday morning at 8 o'clock after, let's say, a weekend to go live than it was at Friday afternoon at 5 when I left the office. There's always disruption. Our job in change management is to minimize that disruption. Let's put that in terms of Teams. How do I easily chat or make a phone call? Those are the easy things. How do I set up a channel? How do I collaborate in that way? How do I store documents? Who can see the documents I can store? Where are they going? Are they going to OneDrive or SharePoint? The more that we do change management well on the front end, the more those questions get answered, and the more efficiency you have once you turn the application on. So how do you do change management, right? Many of you have change management probably internally. Others have been around change management methods. For example, ProSci or LaMarche or Cotter, you may have heard of those. At Perficient, this is ours, I'm showing you now. But what's important, whether you implement a change management using the Perficient methodology or ProSci or whoever, and they're all pretty similar, is that you have an approach. It's not fly by the seat of your pants. If you're going to invest in money and change, and you're going to invest to try to get an ROI, a fly by the seat of your pants model is not recommended. You want to know that you've got a plan of attack. So we have a methodology. It's got 4 phases. I think as consultants, we have to have 4-phase methodologies. I'm from the South. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the preachers in the South have to have 3-point sermons, right? So it's kind of the same thing. Consultants have a 4-phase methodology, so here's our 4-phase methodology. But however, as much as I kid about that, it's critically important. I'm not going to walk through the details of the methodology, but I'm going to hit a couple highlights. One, it's important to have one. I just talked about that. Secondly, you'll see those white arrows in the center of the methodology. And that's really important because any change methodology has to be iterative. Many implementations have multiple phases. As we go through a project, there's a time lapse between when we start the project and we end the project, and things change in that time, whether the scope changes, the timeline may change. Very importantly, the people change. Certainly their dispositions will likely change, but the people themselves may even change. As change management practitioners, as a change management work stream on a project, we've got to be aware of that, and that impacts how we communicate and even how we train potentially. So you'll notice the iterative nature of our methodology. It's not waterfall. We don't hit each of those phases once and go through it. We cycle through them consistently. Finally, the last point I'll make on our methodology slide, and again, if we ever sit down one face-to-face and we get to talk about these things, we can talk about the details more at that point, but you have to start somewhere. So with any circular methodology, there is an entry point, and for us, it's in that define phase. And in the define phase, we're defining the change. We're talking about what's coming, and more importantly, we're talking about why it's coming, and we're doing that in terms that are meaningful to a user. What's in it for me? And so in that define phase, we are trying to sink the hook. We're trying to get folks excited about what's coming. Back to that comment I made earlier, each person has to decide to change, right? They're not going to change. We just implemented Teams at a large real estate firm in the Midwest. We went live with about 80,000 users. And in doing so, it wasn't 80,000 users didn't go live just because we told them it was live, right? We had to connect with them, and they were worldwide, so there are a ton of different tactics we used. But it starts with why, and it starts with helping them understand what's coming. And just an administrative note, if you don't mind putting your phones on mute, that would be great, because we're getting some feedback, and I'm afraid it may cut out some of the content here. People who are unfamiliar with change management, or just maybe not experts, and often ask us, what do you create in change management? What are your deliverables? Because we're not delivering code, and we're not delivering a made end product that can be sold to a consumer, right? At the end of the day, what do we create? Well, we create a change management plan. Okay, that's obvious. We create that case for change. That's that why deliverable I was just talking about. We create a stakeholder analysis, or sometimes it's called a stakeholder assessment, and we iterate that throughout the course of an engagement. So we try to get a good grasp on who our stakeholders are early in a project. And we want to know the level of impact that this project is going to have on them. And when we roll out teams across the board for a company, that impact's probably pretty high for most people. We want to understand their disposition. Are they going to be supportive of this? Are they today supportive of it? Are they neutral or not even aware? Are they going to be resistant because they like WebEx or Zoom or whatever that platform is that they used to use? And where do we need that disposition to be when we go live, right? And if there are any risks for that person or areas of resistance, we're going to try to identify those things. Why is that important from a change management perspective? Because it feeds our communication plan and it feeds our training plan. We don't believe in a one-size-fits-all, let's blast out an email to everybody, to 80,000 users, and expect that we're going to land and get everybody on board with that. In fact, there's the old marketing adage, if you want anything to land, you have to say it 7 times over 3 different channels. And I think that's even greater now that we've got at least 4, arguably 5 different generations in the workforce that likes different kinds of messages delivered to them in different ways. We have to be creative on that. It impacts adoption if people miss our messages. Readiness assessment. Are people ready to consume this? Are they ready to adopt it? Have we taken them on the journey? Because that's something else we iterate over the course of the project. We do it early to baseline where we stand, and then towards the end of the project, we're going to do an assessment, a go, no go, if you will, on the people, not just the technology. Communication plan, kind of obvious, right? Communication artifacts, we create those. They don't create it themselves. It's work. Sometimes we run out of time, or we get lazy, or we have other priorities, and we do end up with just sending emails out. Don't have to over-engineer it, but I'd recommend multiple channels there. And then creating those artifacts takes time. You have to have them reviewed. It's an effort. People underestimate how much work we put in change management. Okay, get it, but understand that this stuff doesn't do the work on its own. Joel mentioned, and Ron did too, change champion networks. There might not be a more important tactic for Microsoft Teams than change champion networks. And there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, we usually have huge audiences. I mentioned the 80,000 seat Teams implementation we did last week. We're doing another one right now in process that's about 17,000. Sometimes there may be 2,000, and that's okay too. But we can't, as a project team, all of us collectively, we can't be the only voice out to all of those people. We need another channel. In fact, we need a two-way channel. And by establishing change champions, we get that. We get people out in the field who can help us deliver key messages, but also can be that channel back to us, letting us know how messages are landing, what concerns or questions are out there, where does that resistance lie. Secondly, champions really help us because they, champions by being around a project, become subject matter experts. And so they become really a first line of defense once we go live. It is so much easier to walk 2 cubes over or 2 offices down the row to ask a question than to call a help desk, right? Because you get that immediate feedback personalized right there. Those change champions being subject matter experts out in the field are really help provide a better end user experience. And then finally, they protect your help desk, right? Because your help desk is probably going to see a surge of calls when you go live, or if you've already gone live, you probably saw that. How do I create a channel? What do I do? Those champions help us out there. And then training plan and training artifacts. We'll talk about those for teams here in a minute. But at the end of the day, that's obviously a key point of change management. Okay, so now I've grounded us on change management. So hopefully we're all on the same page. For many of you, it's probably old news. That's great. If this was new information for you, awesome. So now we're all grounded. Let's talk about what that means for Microsoft Teams. So we have this model, right? And I believe Ron may have showed this slide earlier. I can't remember actually. Ron and I've worked together so many times to get our presentations confused. But this is a very typical maturity model for any technology, but it works with Teams. What you'll see in the gray bars kind of behind the scenes are the value provided by an application as we go through time. Superimposed on top of that are those 5 big colored boxes. So the first 2, deployment and activation for Teams, are largely pretty easy, right? We turn it on. And Teams is set up so well, Microsoft done so well that it's largely configuring we have to do. Now we have to make some decisions around governance and security, and those are all really important. I'm not trying to minimize that, but those are much easier than getting people there. There's value, and you'll see in that fourth gray bar that gets above the net zero ROI line, that by turning it on, we do create some value, and that's awesome. But the real value created is via the awareness, enablement, and proficiency boxes. And those are the change management pieces, right? How do we build awareness? How do we enable users to be to work in Teams and to be effective? And then real value comes when we see proficiency. Those are people things. Those are not technology things, right? So how do we do it with Teams? Teams, we deploy a 3-step approach. And again, this is superimposed, overlaid, and I'm on our change management methodology. And you're going to see that in just a second. But at a highest level, our 3-step approach is, A, let's get started. Get pen to paper, let's get moving. 2, experiment. Figure out what works and what doesn't work. And then scale and support. How do we take this from a small working group or a pilot group to the masses? Now, one thing on point 2 I want to comment, and not to get ahead of myself, because I'm going to talk about COVID-19 here in a little bit, but one of the things we're seeing with COVID-19 is a ton of experimentation. We're putting things out there and trying and failing because we don't have the ability to do it in a safe environment or a lab or testing environment. We're playing with live ammo. The good news with Teams is you can't break a ton, and it's okay to try things out and find that some things are going to work. Some things are going to work in your environment that don't work in a different environment. I say environment, I'm thinking of a culture environment with people, not so much technical. Because it worked in one place doesn't mean it's going to work in another place. And that's okay. And that's why change management is not one size fits all. But it's okay. It's okay to experiment and go forward with the things and press on with things that are working. And the things that aren't, okay, let's pull back, let's assess and try again. But that experimentation piece is really, really important right now. Okay, so getting started, what does it look like? What you'll see on this chart right here is you'll see a bunch of boxes, and I've tried, and these are all the things that have to happen in the, I got air quotes going here, the get started phase. Some of these are technical, and some of these are change, and some of these are both, right? And so what I've highlighted in the thick green boxes are the things that are primarily change management. The things without the green boxes are largely technical. Not that in change management we don't need an awareness of those things, but we're not going to play heavily in those. And then with the dashed boxes, the dotted boxes, for example, a governance plan, pilot plan, migration plans, is shared responsibility between the two. What you'll see specifically from the change management pieces, we're starting to think about rolling out a Teams environment. And let me back up and say, for those of you who have already implemented Teams, this is still important to you too. You may take a look here at these pieces that if I'm laying this out from scratch here, if I were putting in Teams to start with, but if you've already implemented Teams, you may take a look and say, yep, we did that. Yep, we did that. Oh, we didn't do that. How do we go back and do it? No, we can't put the genie back in the bottle, but there are probably things you can pull in here that are going to help your overall adoption, increase it if it's already good, or if you've got some significant gaps, how do you go back and try to fix that? So this is really for everybody. Pick and choose the pieces here that are important to you based on where you are in your journey, because you're all in different places. What you'll see though as we get started is largely, if you think back to the methodology, the top left quadrant and maybe the top two quadrants, which are all about design and then communicate, right? So we build that case for change, the why. We do our first stakeholder assessment. We iterate that through the course of the project because people change, their dispositions change, their areas of resistance may change. We need to know what that is, but we have to start somewhere. We have to get it out there. Readiness assessment. We start building the change network, change champion network. We want that out there early. And by the way, you may use different terms for that, and that's fine. Change agent network, change superheroes. I've heard all kinds of things, right? But you get the gist of what I'm talking about. Getting that governance plan in place is really, really important, because ultimately at the end of the day, that's a hard thing to go back and put in afterwards. I'm dealing with a client right now who we're doing just that. They rolled out Teams to everybody, and now they're putting the governance in, and it feels like a loss for people. And so getting that done early is a really important thing. The pilot plan, we'll talk about pilots in the next step, but that's really important to understand what the plan is going to be, because when we do a pilot, we're not just testing out the technology, but we're also testing out our change tactics. Did we get the communications out there in the right way to get the users ready? Did the training prepare them? And then finally, adoption metrics and reporting. We'll talk more about that in the next session with TyGraph, but having a baseline there and understanding what we're going to measure and how we're going to measure it is key early on. All right, so this is when it gets really heavy. Experimentation. Now, by the way, you can't start change management too early. So don't just start change management when you're ready to go live. That step one has to happen early in the project, same time the technical team is working. But now we're getting into the heavy lifting. So we're getting our communications built and out the door. We're designing the training programs. We'll talk more about what that can look like here coming up. We'll talk about how we're going to manage pilots. What kind of classes are we going to do, particularly for team owners? And by the way, team owners are important because they do create those teams and those channels within a group, and they also typically are friendlies for your company. They're technically savvy, and they really can help you with the subject matter expertise out in the field. A lot of times our team owners are our change champions as well. We're going to establish those feedback processes so that when we do the pilots, we know how to adjust our communication. And then finally, once we get through the pilots and we're happy and we like how it went, again, technology speaking, I'm pretty confident it's going to go well. So did it go well from the change management side? How do we take those pieces then and bake them in to the broader rollout? How do we figure out what didn't work as well from the communication or training perspective? What did people need more of? What did they need less of? And how do we get that baked into the masses as we roll out to, we may have done 300 to 500 people over a course of number of pilots. Now we're talking to thousands of users. How do we make sure that we give them the best experience possible? So let's talk about some specifics. So that was general. Again, I'm peeling the onion here a little bit. And I'm going to go into some of these even further, but let me hit them quickly here. Communications. Communications, we believe, have to be both high level as well as tactical. We start with building awareness, the strategic communications we call them, that really weigh heavily on that case for change and the why, to the tactics, the T minus. What do you have to do? What do you have to know? How do you get ready for your team's implementation? And by the way, the more persona specific we can make them, the better off it'll be. Training, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about here because I'm going to dive into that here in a minute. But how do we make sure users are enabled? By the way, change management is not just training, right? Just because we send somebody to some webinar or show them some videos to watch, that doesn't help us with buy-in. Buy-in really starts with communication, which goes back to that case for change. We'll talk about support sites here in a second. So I'm going to skip that one. Use teams to implement teams. You want to get people using the tool. People use the tool, learn from actually using the tool. So when you work with your change champions or your project team, get them in teams early. As you roll out, get them in teams. Do your communications through teams. If you're a manager, and this is a key message out there for those of you in leadership who may be listening, if you use the new tool, and in this case Teams, people will follow you. If you don't, they won't. So let's say you're a company that is using Skype and you use Skype for IM, but you've rolled out Teams. If people IM you in Skype, if you reply in Skype, or worse, if you initiate with them in Skype, they will stay in Skype. However, if you get them over to Teams, so if they IM you in Skype, but you respond in Teams, they're more likely to switch over to Teams, especially knowing that you, their leader, is using Teams. Pilots, we talked about briefly. You want to pilot Teams as much from the user perspective as technical. Office hours, we're a big believer in office hours. So what we do in a lot of our projects is, for the first week somebody's on Teams, for example, we'll open up a bridge line or a conference room if we're in a physical space, co-located together from 12 to 1, let's say. It could be anytime you want. It could be all day, but let's take an hour for this, for sake of argument here, where folks can come in and just ask us a question. Low pressure, not a big training class environment, and just say, hey, we talked about this in training. Help me remember how to do this. Or, hey, I've got this other question. Maybe it's more advanced because, by the way, there's so much functionality out there. Once people get into it, they're going to ask a better question. The next one that's going to build off the previous knowledge. And really gets into those apps and plugins and things like that that go along with Teams. So it's a great way to use that. And the gamification, we'll talk about that here in a second. So let me dive deeper in a couple of these. And for those of you who are considering rolling it out, or maybe even have rolled it out, this might be particularly valuable to you. Communications, we talked about the effective communications built starting at the strategic level. Here's an example of what those T minus tactical communications look like as we move towards an implementation. And it's really good, especially if you have different waves of implementation. Let's say a company we're working with right now, it's a 17,000 person holding company in Southern California, and they have 3 subsidiaries, and they're going to roll out Teams in 3 big waves, once to each of those different companies. Well, if we just have T-minus communications for all 17,000 people at one time, and it's not tied to an implementation date for given users, it's not going to work well. So a lot of times almost every time we have these staggered, but the idea here is to meet people with where they are. And those T-minus communications, this is an example, by the way, of what a series of sequence of communications might look like. Of course, this is tailored for every given every project we do to make sure it's right for that engagement. When we talk about training, this is a big one, right? People think about training, and there's 2 different ways to do it. Well, there's multiple ways to do it. I'm going to talk about a couple here, really 3. First, instructor-led face-to-face training. And I say face-to-face right now, and everything's virtual and remote, and that's okay too. But the more we can do instructor-led training where it's really customized. It could be 80% the same for every company, but that last 20% is customized to a specific company, to the environment, to what your environment looks like, the better, because that really helps users relate to what it means to them. And by the way, for Teams training, we actually usually do Teams training after go live, which sounds kind of backwards. But then folks, we do some orientation up front. That's fine. But the real heavy lifting training comes afterwards, where they can bring their laptops and play along with us in their live instance of Teams. Because again, we can't break anything too badly, right? We're not entering a whole bunch of data into some CRM system that then, or ERP system that's going to start producing widgets. It's a relatively safe environment. So we usually do our training after go live. And then I'm going to talk about self-paced training, video training with some of our partners. First, learning pathways in Microsoft. So Microsoft has created what they call learning pathways, which is a free resource. So that's check mark number one for you if you've got the Microsoft licenses to get into this site and learn. And it's a series of articles, it's a series of videos that are extremely useful to your users as they implement Teams. When we work with a client or a customer and we are using learning pathways, we'll create a playlist, if you will. A learning path is what it's called for Microsoft. So it takes all this content and tailors it so it's really valuable for your user group. So they have to go try to sift through and sort and find things. It can be presented right there in front of them. So we almost always use learning pathways. We love it. Now, another option is a third-party solution. For example, Brainstorm and Clip Training are two that we like to use. They're relatively cheap, anywhere from a couple bucks a user a year to, I think on the high end, 10 to 12, depends on the number of users, the content you're purchasing. But at the end of the day, it's not expensive. You think about training, $10 a person for a year of training. Yeah, sure, it adds up if you've got 20,000 users. But if you think about the training you're getting for $10, it's pretty crazy cheap. But what these companies do is they have a suite of video vignettes, anywhere from 30 seconds or a minute to, I think the longest one maybe 3 or 4 that I've seen, and they're short and very topical. So you can go find exactly what you're looking for and get a very short, high quality. Let me emphasize that, high quality demonstration of how you can perform whatever function you're looking to perform. Brainstorm and Clip Training, the two I mentioned here, are both partners of Perficient. So if you work with us, we get you a discount on those as well. Usually it's about 25%. But the great thing about this is they're on demand too. And so while you can do an instructor-led training, and we usually do this in conjunction with the instructor-led training, then this becomes a supplemental resource as people want to either reinforce their knowledge or back to that. We're only going to get so far in basic training. Over time or over a year, folks are going to want to learn more or have the ability and the capacity to learn more. So it becomes a great tool to advance that knowledge really, really economically. I talked about using Teams to increase Teams adoption. Create a team for the project team. Create a team for your change champions. Use that as a way to drive your adoption. Obviously, it goes without saying, within your pilot teams, you'll want that as well. And then finally, gamification. Make it fun, right? This is an example that we used to the client in Texas. They had about 13,000 users, I think. And so they created different levels of awards, right? So level 1, a cookie or a pair of Microsoft sunglasses. And by the way, Microsoft's really good at often providing some level of swag for us to give out, and people eat it up. Free stuff, right? People love it. But for level 1, they came by our booth. We had a kiosk that I mentioned before, and just stopped by and asking questions. We had stuff for them, and then we customized this up to a level 4, which we had a raffle for a Surface Go, and that was super cool. Now, not everybody can do that. I get it. But think about ways to celebrate. And back to the whole COVID-19 thing right now, this is a great time to celebrate. This is a great time to invest in your people who are struggling, who are not just struggling from a work perspective and trying to figure out how to collaborate remotely, but got a whole lot of other stuff going on, right? They're distanced, they're working from home, they have kids at home that are screaming, right? Especially now, we've been at it 3 or 4 weeks now, and folks are going crazy. So it's a good time to invest in some things like this, to put some effort and emphasis back on your people. All right, so finally, to close this out, okay, COVID-19 got thrust on us. Now what? What we're seeing a lot of, we're seeing, I guess, 3 different scenarios for companies that are falling into this bucket. The first is companies, and some of you may fall into this, that had implemented the technology, teams, and had gone through your adoption tactics, and you gotten there, you had done it, right? People were already collaborating using Teams in the office or at home or wherever they were. And so now when we move to this work from home environment, relatively non-event. People are in pretty good shape. However, for many and arguably most of us, we fall into the latter two buckets I'm going to describe. The first bucket is we had implemented Teams technically and with some level of adoption, but not where we wanted it to be, or frankly, it needed to be. Maybe we rolled it out and some groups were using it, but many weren't, or maybe we had partial adoption even within groups. It wasn't where we wanted it to be, and now we're in a new world. Or the third bucket here is, shoot, we hadn't considered Teams. We had used other platforms, so we also have to get it in technically, but we have to drive adoption as well. You know, what's interesting about COVID-19 and the fact that it was put upon us is we didn't get the luxury to plan for it. We didn't get the luxury to all those steps I talked about in ACM basics, or basics for teams, all those things that we'd want to do in a project to drive the most successful engagement we can from our users. We don't have that luxury because we went from 60 to 0, really, right, in a matter of less than a week. And now we got to figure out how to work effectively. So what I'm going to share now is not necessarily the right way to implement Teams, but what do you do if you find yourself here? What tactics can you employ very quickly? First, understand your challenge. This is where I would say, and I don't have a statistic on this, but if I had to come up with one, I would say 90% of people mess up, is right here in this first step. We just start throwing videos at our problem to our users. Hey, go watch this video and you'll know how to use Teams. We don't even necessarily tell them which videos to go watch. Just go watch some of these videos. It's like throwing darts at a dartboard with our eyes closed. We might hit it, but the odds are we don't. In fact, recently I went axe throwing with a group of guys a couple months ago, back in January. And there were people by the end of the night closing their eyes and throwing axe at the board, which is scary for a number of reasons. I certainly wouldn't want to be anywhere around them. But surprisingly, that board, if you ever been axe throwing, is huge, and they weren't even hitting it, right? And the axe wasn't sticking. That's what happens when we just throw videos at a solution. We need to understand the challenge. If you've implemented Teams and you don't have the adoption, or you don't have it across the board, why? What is it? Did you not roll it out well to start with? Did you not communicate it? Do you not have buy-in? Maybe you did all that, but you didn't give them the training they need. Once you understand the problem, you can pinpoint your change solution to meet what it is, whether it's communications or maybe just training. And if it's training, what kind of training do people need? Secondly, I am an advocate of a video first approach right now. We obviously can't get together in a room and do instructor-led training face-to-face. That isn't going to happen. Now, yes, we can do a virtual call, and that's good. But a video first, specifically on video training with a brainstorm, with clip training, or even learning pathways, is huge because people can do it on their own, from their own desk, at their own time. And if done well, and you can create those playlists, and by the way, you can do that with brainstorm and clip training as well. It's going to help your users really focus on what they need to learn. Your change champions, your early adopters, your SMEs are more valuable than ever because they have deep relationships with your people. They know them. They work with them closely, whether it's within their team or their department or their region, wherever it is. I can't underestimate the importance of them right now. You probably have some kind of network already established, whether it's formal or informal. Leverage it. If you don't, see what you can do about getting that in place extremely quickly. Finally, drive campaigns through your metrics. Ed's going to talk through what tyGraph can do. tyGraph is an amazing tool because it really allows us to understand, point number one, where our challenges are from a data perspective, right? There's a subjective nature or aspect to that, and there's an objective nature. That data doesn't lie. It tells us what we need to know, and it tells us where we can focus our efforts. And it also provides a baseline and shows us when we're being successful or maybe where we're not, and where we need to change. I can't get a thing to advance. And then finally, complement your company culture. Every company has a culture. Even now, as we work remote, how do we tie that culture into working remotely? The word empathy was used recently or earlier today on this call. And empathy has no meaning within the change management space than it ever did before. A couple of reasons for that. First of all, it is we need empathy because we're all struggling to work in this new way. It's hard. How do we show empathy? But we take that further. How do we show empathy with teams? How do we show empathy with people trying to adopt new things outside of their comfort zone and getting there? What are we doing to help grow that? And frankly, in showing empathy, one of the things we've done, and you've probably done it too, these virtual happy hours, right? Well, it's in those places where I find my team experimenting with teams and learning all the new features and functionality and what they can do with teams, and just checking in with people one-on-one and seeing their face. And oh, by the way, if I can do that in Teams, just by using it allows me to bake the culture into Teams and the usage there, and it goes a long way. So just because we're remote doesn't mean our culture's gone away. Our culture may have shifted a little bit, but largely your company still has the culture it ever always did. Leverage that in how you use Teams, how you roll out Teams to drive successful adoption. That was a lot. And it's way more fun to do this in person when I can see your faces, but I can't. So that was a lot of one-way communication. Let me stop there and hopefully open up some two-way communication. I think I have about 10 minutes here. What questions do you have? How did this land? Did it make sense? Where are you? And what's your reaction to what you just heard? And I can't see the chat as I'm presenting, so if there's anything in the chat window too, if somebody could read that off to me, that'd be great.
I'm about to look through the chat now, David. Just one question I would ask you as more of a technical mind, right? What is the biggest challenge that gets kind of underrepresented or maybe unexpected when it comes to a team's implementation from a change management perspective?
Yeah, so it's when you think about teams and all the functionality that's out there, Ron, a lot of times the early aspects of teams to adopt, whether it's IM and presence or doing the things I can do in, let's say, in Skype, become pretty easy, right? And so that's not hard. And people think, oh, because I've implemented Teams and now I can IM, Ron, you and I can IM. Yeah, it wasn't hard. I didn't need to really focus on change management to make that happen. That's great. But the frustration is right around the corner when someone tries to create that the team site or that channel, or how do I get people to start collaborating there, storing my documents? And so the hard part, the short answer to that question is from a change perspective, if we're not done right, we limit the functionality. People get that IM piece and then they kind of quit and they stop and they don't really get the value out of Teams and all the things it can offer. And then I'm talking about the advanced things, like all the apps you can add in.
Totally. And Danielle also replied that when they implemented Teams, they used a lot of short sessions that got the users into Teams faster and worked better than lectured classes and whatnot, even when virtual. Any additions to that?
Yeah, I mean, Danielle, you're dead on, and it's similar to why we do training after we go live, right? Because we want people to be able to take it in bite-sized chunks. We do training; it's usually just an hour. Obviously, we're not touching on all the Teams functionality in that hour, but we're going to get the basics. We're going to get people in there and using it, and then people grow, right? So once you get that foundation built, you can take kind of the next step. And once you get the next step, you can take the next one. So, Danielle, it sounds like you had a pretty great approach there, and I suspect you had pretty good feedback and response on that approach.
Yep. And we have another comment just saying that it takes a lot of resources to get these things done the right way. Yep. And I mean, do you have any opinions on that? Because I think those resources don't just have to come from the people who own change management or IT. It can be a mix, right?
That's right. What we do. So change management has a huge ROI. So I would say, yes, it's worth investing in change management. But it can get expensive, especially if you have a number, let's say, consulting resources from Perficient or wherever. And so what we do a lot of is we partner with our clients where we'll provide the leadership, the thought leadership in a resource or maybe a couple of resources that will also get stuff done, but don't have the capacity to do it all. And we'll partner with our customers' resources that have, I say, capacity and capability. So capability meaning they can help us with change management deliverables, whether they're creating PowerPoint decks or emails or whatever it may be, but also the capacity to do it. And so we become a change team. And oh, by the way, that's really helpful from a customer perspective for two reasons. One, you significantly lowered the cost investment. But secondly, from a change perspective, if I'm walking into your company and I'm partnering with your people know your culture way better than I do. In fact, I probably don't know it at all. And so for me to pretend like I do and just say that what I did at, Acme company and brought it over here is going to work at your company, that, culture plays so much into that. There's a huge risk there. But if I'm partnering with your resources who know it, who knows what works at your company and what doesn't work at your company, then I'm able to then create a change plan that's going to be efficient and effective.
That's awesome. And I guess when we start talking about a video first approach and whatnot, there are a lot of resources, as you mentioned. How many of those do you end up having to create your own videos for versus taking the out of the box stuff? Because I realize that, you can talk about the functionality all day, but there are some very specific company components that fall into play as well.
So that's a great question. When we work, we don't create a ton of customized videos. We certainly have for specific situations. Joel talked about a lot of those integrations with other applications. And so if we have things like that we're going to talk about that are going to be specific to your company, we will create a short video. But honestly, Brainstorm, for example, has 2,500, maybe close to 3,000 videos now, and their quality is off the charts. And so what we're going to do, what's maybe more important, is to create that playlist of videos that are really specific to your environment. The great thing about Teams is, regardless where we implement Teams, the look and feel doesn't change a lot. Similar to Outlook, right? Your Outlook looks like my Outlook. Now, SharePoint, on the other hand, has a completely different look and feel. And so some of those canned videos really fall short because even though they're describing a concept that you could apply in your environment, the look and feel is so different. You're putting a lot on your users to translate that. But Teams has got a pretty standard approach. And so those are great. So short answer, Ron, we do create videos, but we try to do that. We try to limit those and leverage as much of the things that are already out there as we can.
No, it makes sense. Leanne had another question. Leanne, did you want to ask it or you want me to ask it?
Oh, that's okay. I can ask it. Can y'all hear me?
Awesome.
Good?
Yeah,
Yep.
we can hear you. Go ahead.
So I have actually a small client, and I find this quite regularly that the admins, so they purchase Office 365 and hold it for a really long time, and then the admins are not comfortable with anything in it, therefore they shut everything off. So now they've got Teams is available to the users if they don't really communicate. There's no communication plan or anything.
Yep.
But some users know about it, but when I go in there to try and help them, everything is shut off, right? Everything, even like websites that you could bring into a team. So how do you manage those? That's a whole different change management model, I feel like, dealing with those people. Can you explain that?
Well, there's two things. One, you've got to get on the same page from a company perspective on what you're going to do, right? Or what they're going to do. Are they going to open up? Are they going to restrict it? And then based on that, you're obviously, that's to some extent the hand you're going to be dealt to play with. The hard part there, though, and Leanne, I'm not sure if I can answer your question, but what I find, and we're dealing with that right now with that Southern California company I mentioned, they're in that boat where they had turned on Teams. They didn't tell anybody it was out there, but it was, and people could go find it. And there was no governance and little security.
Right.
It was just there. And now, as we roll it out, we're implementing those things, and we're putting new rules in place. And so we have to get those in place. We have to get those figured out. And now we're training on what those things are. And we have an audience that for some, this is very new, brand new, and perfect because we can train them where we want to train them. But now we've got to build something, or at least communicate differently with the people who have been using it in what I call the Wild West, right? With no rules. And now we're saying, oh, by the way, now there are rules, right? and you've got natural resistance to that because these are people who are probably tech savvy that figured out and they liked what they had, and now you're changing it. So you have to be very careful with that and how you do it.
Can I extend on that? Because I think what I'm finding, so I'll just be totally transparent, it's my husband's, where my husband works. And so honestly, this has come about because I'm at home with him and it's making me want to pull my hair out listening to how they're working. So, so I'm like, what? They have, 6 different siloed programs that everybody's using. And so they don't have adoption in anything. People all pick and choose. And so, the admins, and I know that they had turned on Office 365 like a year ago because I was going to work with them. And then it came to a screeching halt. So now they have this, but so my husband's trying to be a champion, right? He's trying to do these things. He's trying to get this. They have a new project they're trying to get set up and use this. And he's super frustrated. And there's other people who want to use it. It's almost like shooting them because it does the opposite effect because everything's shut off, right? Because you have people who are excited. They understand. They've watched videos. They've watched trainings. They've done all this stuff. And then they don't have access to do any of it. So, and it's not even necessarily leadership. It's the admins in the IT department.
Sure. And some of that comes with education, to be totally honest with you. I know that's kind of a lame answer, but what we find is that when we engage with clients, we try to bring all of the necessary people to the table for workload education to talk about how, your security team and your IT admins and others can, secure the tenant. I mean, the metaphor I always throw out there is like bumper bowling, right? Where if I bring my 4 and 6-year-old to the bowling alley, it's different from like you and I having to be going to the bowling alley, right? So I have to have those bumpers up through security and compliance and processes and just assurances so that those things are set up and they feel secure so that users can thrive and kind of meeting them in the middle. Otherwise, you go too far in one direction and it's a police state, unfortunately, with, in that metaphor, a lot of gutter balls.
Well, and the interesting thing that I see happen is I totally agree. I think that they're afraid of from the security perspective, maybe, and just the unknown that they don't understand what all the apps do and all that. But at the same time, any user can go and they can purchase or get some other system. So to me, I'm like, this crazy. They're inviting all of this vulnerability into their organization.
It's like you're causing you're bringing your own reality to fruition because people go around if you're a blocker. Definitely. And we see that all the time because we work with like the Fortune 2000. So there's a lot of that. And if you don't have a direction pushed down from the top, the executives and the people in the front of it, not IT specifically, but IT needs to be a partner at the table, then you're going to have a lot of that to where you have 8 apps to do the exact same thing. And although Teams is great for bringing your own app, that is not where you want to be as far as having a bunch of different things, a bunch of fractured messages.
Exactly. Thank you.
So I'm just jumping in a quick time check. Up next, we have Ed Senes, who's going to be talking about measuring activity in Teams and helping us with the awesome dashboards for tracking.
Exactly. And thanks again for the question, Leanne. We really appreciate it.
So
really good integration or really good interaction here. I wanted just to say thanks for everybody for I think that went really well. And thanks again, David.
Yeah, you're welcome. So Joel cuts us off because I can talk to David forever. Let us know if you want to talk more about this because there probably are a million things that we could go into and happy to do so. So I'll defer to Joel and Angie on the marketing side with how to do that, and maybe it's in the chat. But if there's if you want to follow up, just stick a note in there, and we'll make sure to make that happen.